everyone, how's it going? I'm DW and welcome to Week of Grooves. So for this week, I've got a worship groove for y'all, and this is one of my favorite worship grooves to play in my favorite time signature for worship music, especially slower in worship music, 6/8. This is a great groove that will work in also if you're playing a 6/8 rock or pop song, but it especially works well for worship, and it's mostly used in many worship songs because it's just got a great weight to it. Alright, let's jump right in. So, your ride cymbal, or your very, very large crash, I should say, or if you have very, very large hi-hats, whatever you choose to ride on will be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, meaning it will be quarter notes. However, you can also sometimes add in the eighth notes, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the basic skeleton rhythm is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now you're going to use a technique I recommend. It's called wash riding. It's a really cool technique. What it is you play this ride cymbal with the shaft of your stick. So not really like the body, like you would crash riding, but the shaft. And this gives you intonation, but it also gives you nice wash, especially when compared to playing on the tip. Playing the tip of the stick on the ride cymbal. Cool. Now, the very important thing about that is you want to practice when you do that, and also when you perform it, you want to utilize inner drum set dynamics. What those are is they are playing a groove loudly when appropriate, but also having certain instruments of your drum set slightly softer to bring out other instruments. So, for instance, your snare and your kick drum should really drive this groove, and your wash riding should just support that. If your wash riding is as loud as the kick and the snare, the groove automatically loses a lot of weight and a lot of depth. Okay, speaking of snare, your snare part is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 4, both of the bars. The only reason this is a 2-bar pattern is because the kick pattern changes. Also, you can add in the eighth notes, but we'll talk about that later as well. For your kick drum, you're going to go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and on and on and on. Now, all it is together slowly sounds like this. 1 and 2 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and. Now, when you play this groove, it sounds the best to play it what's called laying it back or behind the beat. Now, that doesn't mean you're off the beat. That means you push that 4 as far as you can while still being with your click track. Cool. Now, let's talk about some of those eighth notes I promised. So, what you can do occasionally on the snare is, remember we talked about ghost notes when we were discussing funk grooves. Well, worship music kind of does that too, but it does it in a little bit of a different way. Instead of doing drags, what worship drummers will tend to do is create a delay effect by playing some of the following eighth notes after the initial snare hit on 4 slightly softer, like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and, right? And 6 and. You almost can't even hear them. And a good way to really make this feel subtle and smooth and atmospheric is don't always play the same amount of eighth notes, right? Sometimes play 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and, right? Cool. The whole groove up to speed. Oh, and by the way, if you want to look at any section and really get it nailed separately, I definitely encourage you to do that. Feel free to pause the video. Okay, slowly and then up to speed. Oh, keep 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on your hi-hat for this groove. That's a very important thing. Also, if you want to know the build-up to this groove that happens on the bridge, it is simply 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1. So the toms are eighth notes and the snare hits a 1. I will now play the groove slowly and then I'll play the groove fast with the build-up. And 1. And you can sometimes do that. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now up to speed with the build-up. 1. Here we go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and if more of you means less of me, take everything. More of you is all I need. Take everything. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for viewing, everybody. Have a great weekend, and I will see y'all next time.